You're listening to The Venomous Fringe, Cryptids and Paranormal, with hosts Chris Fringe and Ryan Tremblay. Join them as they dive into the macabre of our world and dive into the madness and the mysteries that lie above it. Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Venomous Fringe. I'm your host, Chris Fringe, and join me this evening as I sit down with two Idaho researchers who've had Bigfoot and Dogman encounters respectively. Now, tonight's show is going to be part one of two parts that we're going to be doing with these two guests, because the encounters are so long that they even go and exceed an hour, and I think it's also pretty cool because they have more encounters to talk about, but it also involves other people and some other discussion as well. So we're going to divide it into two parts, with tonight being part one of their reports. So I hope you guys enjoy this episode because it's pretty interesting. A lot of these reports that we're going to be hearing about tonight are pretty complex, and to me, freak me out a bit. So gear up, folks. It's good to see you all here again. Hope you all are doing well. I want to thank you all for the patience for this upload. Unfortunately, I had lost a family member this past week, as well as on top of that, I also had some time constraints, but overall, here we are with another episode, and I hope you guys enjoy. I'll see you guys at the end of this interview. Joining me right now on the Venomous Fringe is Tiberius and Lobo. Lobo, Tiberius, welcome to the Venomous Fringe. How are you guys this evening?
We're doing well, thank you.
Doing well.
Well, first and foremost, guys, I just want to say I hope you guys are doing pretty well, and I'm glad to have you guys here this evening because, you know, on the Venomous Fringe, talking about cryptids and things of the unknown, it is pretty big, and you guys got a lot to share this evening. So one of the things I want to get into first is, where did it all begin? And what I mean by that is, where was the starting point for you getting into the whole cryptid base of things? Was it through encounters? Was it through hearing things? Or was it by slight interest?
This is Tiberius. Mine has been encounters and experiences that I've had since I was a young child.
Yeah, mine as well. Mine was from an experience that happened when I went camping here in Idaho. And just from there, it really sparked my interest of the supernatural and the, cryptids and all that. But yeah, that's our own separate stories. And then we also, just by chance, we met and we found out we both were into the same thing, and it just kind of blew up from there. And we've had some pretty awesome encounters and some pretty intense things happen to us both.
And we've done a lot of stupid things that brought this stuff on too.
Yeah.
Things always tend to happen with stupid things, right?
Yes.
I mean, personally, it's always good to connect with other people out there who are in the same interest and at least have history and know what to talk about, especially if you're close by. But I want to go ahead and throw both of you guys separately, individually, asking about encounters and what you guys have seen one by one and collected. So I'm going to start with you, Lobo. Now, Lobo, I'm going to start with you first. When were your first encounters with cryptids and the unknown?
Well, my first one that really opened up my eyes was on a camping trip, that happened in 2000, I would say 13, around there. And this is in Idaho, in the area known as Redfish or Stanley. And a beautiful area full of mountains and streams and huge lakes, hidden lakes, pine trees, just a vast area. And I've always loved watching, Bigfoot shows like In Search Of when I was a kid, and I was intrigued by it. So I always suspected or even thought is a possibility that Bigfoot was out there. And so I go camping, and this is me, my wife, my daughter. She's about 1 years old, and I take my two nieces, and we go up camping to Redfish Lake, and we get to the ranger station because take it, this is like my first time really going on a straight up tent up in the mountains with just firewood and just seeing, just having a good time, and there's not really any people out there. So I go out there and we go to this ranger station to get a map and just to find out like good places to go. And the ranger tells me, he says, hey, you know what, there's a Bigfoot camera crew out here that are searching for Bigfoot. And I'm like, what? And this is the ranger that's telling me. And he's saying it like at a low voice, like, to keep it on the DL. And so I'm like, really? He goes, yeah, there's been some campers that have been reporting seeing Bigfoot out here. So they have a camera crew that's searching the mountains. And it was exciting, right? And I was like, wow. I'm like, that's cool. And so we go to this campsite that's kind of away from everybody. And we're walking around, me, my wife, my daughter, and our nieces, and we're just messing around. I'm like, hey guys, I've heard that if you do a loud yell, that and this was the second day. We got there in the evening, and we pitched our tent and all that, and we slept. And then the second day it was when we started hiking. And so I said, hey, you know what? They said if you yell, that Bigfoot will yell back, and we were just messing around. So there was nobody out there, right? And so I just yelled, and we waited, and everybody's laughing, and then we hear this massive yell just bellow through the valley coming from it seems like it was miles out there. And everybody, we're in shock. We're like, no way. We're like, that had to have been a person. But it was so loud, and me, I'm a grown man. I screamed pretty loud, and this thing, I couldn't even fake it if I had a loudspeaker, it seemed like. So we got pretty scared. Everybody's like, oh my gosh, something just screams back. So then I grabbed this stick and I hit it on the tree 3 times. I'm like, I've seen him do this, and I did it. And sure enough, we heard the 3 knocks back coming way out in the valley. And so my wife is like, okay, that's enough, let's go. So we go back to our tent, and and things are cool. This is in the daytime. And that first night we had a bunch of deer that would come literally into the camp, and we would feed them marshmallows by hand. They'd come so close, and you could give them marshmallows, and they'd come with little babies. Just the cutest thing. And so this night there was no deer, not one deer. There was no birds, nothing, and it was really creepy. And so we thought that was strange, and we ended up, we pitched 2 tents, my wife and I and our baby in one, and my 2 nieces in the other. We're separated about 10 feet. And so we go to sleep, it's a great night, and we're woken probably like at 2 in the morning. And this is about July or August. And so we wake up about 2 in the morning, a growl woke us up. It woke me up, and it was a huge growl, and it sounded like it was right in between our tents, and like I could feel it in my chest. And I woke up. I didn't say a word, and my wife says, "Did you hear that?" She woke up too. I said, "I heard that." And then we heard it again, just this huge growl, and it was just, I don't know, I can't explain it. It was so deep that you could feel it. And then all of a sudden she said, "Hey, did you fart?" She goes, "It smells so bad." And I'm like, "I didn't fart." And that's when I noticed like the smell was just putrid. It was the worst smell I've ever smelled. And so I told her, I go, I think it's Sasquatch, Bigfoot. And so I grabbed my flashlight, and I unzipped the tent really slowly, and I dove out, did my ninja roll, and I sweeped the whole area with the flashlight. There was nothing there. I mean, it was gone. Whatever it was there 1 second, and it was gone. Either camouflaged or hid or walked off so quietly or something. But I know that growl woke me up, and then the smell that was right there, and we didn't hear a noise after that. So then we grabbed their nieces, and we all slept in one tent that night, and we took off early the next morning because we were just not gonna take a chance on whatever it was. So that was my first encounter of something that I believe was a Bigfoot. And here in Idaho, people don't know this, but Idaho is the Pacific Northwest. We think of Oregon and Washington, but if you Google it, Idaho is the Pacific Northwest. So it's just mountains, pine trees, lakes, just an amazing, vast area that's a lot of it's unexplored. And so that was my first experience, and that's what kind of set me off to really dig into it and to pursue it.
It's interesting that event like that in an area in camping wise, notoriously for Bigfoot like encounters to happen. I think it's also crazy to make mention too that a park ranger, I mean, maybe crazy is a little bit of an exaggeration, but interestingly that a park ranger would mention something of that nature, especially makes me wonder sometimes that for some of them out there that know a bit of thing or two, it's pretty good, but I also think as a reminder, but that also would catch curiosity too. When you were when you were at this campsite though, and when you had heard that growl, do you believe that that was possibly the Bigfoot not retaliating, but kind of just making notion that it's there and that it heard your scream?
I really do believe that. I believe that it heard me, and either if it knew that I was messing around with it, or maybe it was just ticked off that I was doing that. But I really do believe that it singled me out and followed me somehow to my tent and waited till we were sleeping to come and make itself known. And that's part of the reason why we left, because I was like, this is really weird that this thing that yelled from seem miles away would be at my tent that same night. That was really creepy, and it was like, there's something up with that. We gotta go, and so we took off.
And following this, you had a different perception, I believe, on basically, I would take the whole nature and knowing that there's something out there that is pretty strong.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And as a kid growing up, I grew up. I lived all over. I born in California, raised in Idaho. I've been raised in Texas several years of my life. I've lived in Nebraska. I've lived in North Carolina. So my uncle, who's actually, I have a lot of family from Michigan, and my uncle Roy is from Michigan, and he moved to Texas, and he would tell me stories of when he was in Texas, and this is Hayes County. I don't know if any of our listeners are familiar with Josh Turner, but he lives in Travis County, Austin, and I lived in the same area just outside of Austin in Hayes County, which is the Blanco River, San Marcos, where the Dogman is really notorious over there. And my uncle told me a story about a Bigfoot when he was a kid, and just to be real, he says that he was driving in those back roads in Texas in Hayes County, and it's really swampy over there. A lot of reeds, rivers. The trees that just make this crazy canopy where you don't even see sunlight. Well, he's driving over there, and he's in the passenger side, and he says him and his friends are driving around smoking weed as teenagers, and they pull up on this little dirt road and they stop. And he says they're smoking weed and they're laughing, telling jokes, just doing what teenagers do. And he says on the passenger side of his window that was down, he said there was reeds, and he said they all heard a loud noise and they all looked, and right where his window was at, two hands separated the reeds, and a Bigfoot stuck his head and looked at everybody in the car, and then let the reeds go back and got back up and walked away, and they drove off in a hurry, and they told people, but they dismissed it because they were getting high, they were smoking weed. But that's his story to me when I was a little kid, when I lived in Hayes County. He would tell me those things, and so so I believe, like, man, he had to have been telling the truth. There's got to be Bigfoot out here. And then coming back and forth to the Pacific Northwest, to Texas, back and forth, and I had my experience in 2013. So that's what really gave me a new perspective.
That's also another interesting case too, and I don't know if you at the time of that being a thought, there often has been some sort of discussion about how certain odors can perhaps maybe have an effect on such a creature that might take it as negative. And do you think possibly that that Bigfoot that your uncle that sighting of was possibly curious of the odor or was trying to get the teenagers out of the area?
Yeah, I would think that the curiosity of the smell and the noise and the kids laughing and having fun, and the funny thing is my uncle told me how it just really, he said it almost traumatized him to see it right by his face, and for it to just to open the reeds, and but everybody was looking, but it was just a couple feet away from his face, and he says he locked eyes with it, and it looked he says he felt like it was sizing him up and everybody in the car because it looked at them all, and then it just went away, and so I think maybe it was curious, and or maybe it was a territorial thing, you know, and so I'm not 100% sure, but I would see it as a territorial and a curiosity thing.
I would agree with that as well. What would you think of it too with besides Bigfoot, how about any cases of the dogmen? You know, I know that you've mentioned anything with Sasquatch, but now too with Bigfoot, like Dogman. Have
Yeah.
you yourself seen anything related to that nature, or as you mentioned Dogman briefly with Texas, have you heard anything necessarily of the Dogman?
Actually, I have, but back in those days, my family called it the Wolfman. They didn't call it the Dogman. And the first the thinking back when I was a kid, you know, living over there in Hayes County, my grandma and my grandpa, they used to travel a lot, and so they lived in Michigan for a long time. And my grandma, she told me when she lived in Michigan, and this is, I think it's, she lives around Saginaw, northern Michigan. But she told me that that the wolf man in Michigan would eat the homeless people. And I'm a little kid, and we lived in Hayes County. She's telling me this, and I don't remember, something sparked that conversation. Somebody brought up the werewolf, and somehow, and my grandma brought up stories about when she was a kid living in Michigan, that the Wolfman, everybody believed in the Wolfman in that little town, and the Wolfman would eat homeless people that would travel on the train, any homeless people who would move into the town that would sleep on the outskirts of the town, that the Wolfman would eat them, and nobody filed complaints, or nobody was there to miss them because they didn't have any family or whatever, and the Wolfman would get them. And so she told me that when I lived in Hayes County. And when I lived there, me and a friend of mine were having a sleepover, and we, in my living room, we had one of those couches that turned into beds, and we were sitting on that bed and we're watching TV. I think it was a scary movie or something, and my grandpa's room was right by the living room, and we were either we were hyping ourselves up or something. But when it came time to go to sleep, I do distinctly remember us hearing the creaking on the porch. We heard the creak. We both looked. There was nothing there. We started talking again. He looked again, and he screamed. He screamed really loud, and my grandpa came running out, and he says, like, what the hell's the matter? He's mad. And my friend said a baboon looked through the window. He said it was a baboon, and my grandpa was very paranoid, man. He had, the alarm systems in the house. He had guard dogs. He had all these measures, a big old tall fence, all these things, and I always found it weird. Like, man, why are we so? This looks like we're ready for a war or something. But that my friend said that it looked like a baboon. Is the only way he could describe it, was on our porch looking at us on the couch. So my grandpa goes out, with his rifle, and he looks around, turns on all the spotlights on our property. He didn't see anything. He came back in. He says, you guys are probably just imagining it from the shows. And I didn't think about it then at all. I thought, like, man, what the heck? I thought he was just hyping himself up from the scary movie we were watching. But now that I think about it, to see a baboon, that's got to be some kind of like a dogman or some kind of a different type of a Bigfoot or something. And they're down there in Hayes County. There's a lot of reports of them. So just for that to happen to us, thinking back all these years, I think, when it came up and it seen us laughing and telling jokes and watching that movie, maybe our fear, because we were pretty fearful, and it just showed itself for some reason. And but I looked and I didn't see anything, and then we heard the creak again. He looked and he screamed and said it was a baboon, and I didn't get to see it though. But those are my, so I whether it was a dogman or not, that's my story from when I was a kid. And my grandma, she knew about the Wolfman, is what they called it back then, and I didn't really know about the Dogman until, gosh, I got to say 2018 with Tiberius here, from an encounter we had here in Idaho, that he asked me, he goes, maybe it was a Dogman, and I told him, I'm like, I don't know what. He goes, he goes, look, and he sent me this video about different types of Bigfoots and with the beast of seven shoots, all these different scenarios and theories, and so then and that's kind of what led me on the Dogman. But I mean, I always believed in the Wolfman, but it's just the term of Dogman kind of, that's when I really first heard of it.
It's a pretty interesting encounter, even for as a kid. I mean, I can understand the thought process of hyping up, because I've done that too with watching scary movies when I was a kid. I'd often have that, like, I'd hear things, but really that's just my mind playing psychologically on me. But there are types of dogmen sighted that have been reported to be baboon-like, which is a type 3 variant 1 that's been often reported. Even with Sasquatch different types, there's been some that have questioned or seen that said it looked like a baboon. So it is believable, and the mention of it being in a hot spot where there was Bigfoot activity and there is possible Dogman activity. I mean, it's a very huge hot spot, to say the least. But now I want to transition over to Tiberius. Now, Tiberius, your first encounters with seeing a cryptid and so on, where did it all start?
Well, to give you just a little bit of information, I'm a third generation Idahoan, and my family roots go back to Louisiana and Arkansas. My great-grandfather on my mother's side was a Cajun, so there's stories about that, and we could talk about that at another time. So some of this stuff is not unfamiliar to my family, because we've always been backwoods. My family moved from Idaho. I was born in the mid-'70s, and my family moved from here because there wasn't a lot of jobs in the area that we lived in, and my dad got a job in the state of Washington. So all of my youth, until I was about 19 when I moved back to Idaho, I grew up in the state of Washington in the Pacific Northwest. And my dad was cowboying on a reservation. It's called White Swan. And I was probably about between the age of 3 to 4 years old when we lived there. And let me ask you this. Do you remember the movie, The Never-Ending Story?
Yes.
Do you remember The Great Nothing Servant?
Yes, I do.
Imagine that creature with ambered color eyes. Okay, just picture that. So when I saw The Never-Ending Story, it freaked me out. I'm going to tell you why. Because I have had experienced some kind of a trauma that changed my life and sent me to what I do for a living now and what I used to do. When we were living out there on the reservation, I remember as a young child looking through the big picture window and looking at these two. I thought they were monsters. I didn't know what else to call them. But these two giant, black, muddy looking things with these amber eyes looking at me. And it terrorized me. And I still have dreams. I can remember dreams of the house that we lived in and having the experience of seeing these creatures out in the yard. And I remember screaming with no sound coming out of my voice because I was so terrified, and them just sitting there looking at me. Meanwhile, while I lived in that house, my parents can testify. And I use legal terms because the job that I do now, I work for, I got to be careful of what I do. I got to protect my livelihood. I work for a state department, and I work as an investigator for the federal government. So I've got to be careful. My parents would say that in my room that there was a bathroom around the corner from my bedroom, and every night at the same time, they would see the outline of a little girl ghost going into my bedroom. And they'd go in there, and I'd be talking to something or playing with something in the dark. So I've got that going on, plus remembering seeing these creatures. And all I remember moving from off the res to another place called Centerville, Washington. My dad said that something was going on with the cattle, and it was no longer profitable for them to ranch, for the rancher that he was working for on the res. And so that's all I remember that. But once we moved out of that house, my mom said for 2 years I quit speaking. Something traumatic, she said, happened to me, and I didn't speak a word for 2 years. And so, from age of 3 to 4 to the age of 6-ish, I started speaking. And I remember pictures and images, but I don't remember much of my childhood other than that stuff. And so that was my first experience with I know we were going to talk about cryptids, but it was a kind of a paranormal cryptid experience with these creatures, these things that I saw several times. They reminded me of the servant off the Neverending Story, that huge looking wolf thing that walked on 2 legs. And so that was my first memories of some kind of a cryptid type being, and I didn't know what it was. I just called them monsters, and I used to draw pictures of them. My mom has these pictures that I used to draw when I was in kindergarten and things like that of different kinds of creatures and crazy stuff. She thought I was an over imaginative kid, but that was very traumatic for me. And ever since in 1977 when Leonard Nimoy came out with In Search Of, and of course the Patterson Gimlin film of Patty came out. Oh, dude, I was all over it. I was ordering books from the library. They had to ship them to our house because we didn't have a local library in the 100 the town we lived in was a small farming community with 100 people, or 100 families, excuse me. And then about 10 miles away was a larger city. Well, to us it was a city. I'm backwoods redneck. And it was about 8,000 people that lived there. But my second encounter that I had was again in the state of Washington. It's in a place called Klickitat County. There's a lot of activity there. And this is switching to my first Bigfoot signs that I came across. I was about 10 years old. I think it was like in 84 or 85, around there. And we were having a family reunion at a place called Brooks Park. You can look it up on the internet. And it's a vast campground in a just below the Yakima Indian Reservation. And I was out there, and I was at a weird age because I had cousins about 5 years younger than me, and the other cousins were 4 to 5 years older than me. So I was by myself. So I was doing what young boys do who have a pocket knife and a .22 and a whatever, and that love to make their own camps and things like that. And I had one of those uncles. It was a great uncle that kind of took interest in me because I didn't have really anybody my age during these family reunions. And I found this footprint that I showed it to him, and he measured it, and I remember it being about 16 inches long and about 5.5 inches wide. And he got really scared. He said, "Son, you're going to come with me, and we're going to spend the next couple days in the cabin." And he pulled out a fifth of whiskey and started drinking. And I don't know if he's, and he was from the northern Seattle area. So that whole family reunion, I was in a cabin with him and doing things with him, and he gave me a new pocket knife and $20 to stay in the cabin. Hey, what boy wouldn't do that at that age? So that was my first physical experience of seeing something that related to a Sasquatch. But my first physical encounter, now I have never seen, I've seen things that look like a Dogman more than I've seen things physical like Sasquatch. Because every time I've had a Sasquatch encounter, or what I thought was Sasquatch, was behind a bush or a tree or something like that. Back in the mid 80s, we had a recession, kind of like what we just went through in 2009. My dad lost his job, and the farm that we had, my dad couldn't make the payments. So we moved from that little town that I told you of 100 families to that town of almost 7,000 to 8,000 families. And we moved into a little shack on the edge of town, and my dad got a job at a lumber yard. And there was a creek that flowed through there called the Little Klickitat. And when we moved out there, my parents were on the verge of a divorce. And this is what I find really interesting. My parents were on the verge of a divorce because of financial things and some other things that I still don't know to this day, and that's not important. And I'm moving into a bigger city. To me, that was a huge city. And I'm 13 years old at this time, getting ready to go into 8th grade, 7th, 8th grade age. I have no friends, but I see the creek in the woods behind the house. It was less than 200 yards. And I went, that's where I know what to do and who I am. Grab my fishing pole. And I'm a man of faith because of a lot of my experiences. I've had some supernatural experiences that have pushed me to be a man of faith. I've been a senior pastor of a church for over 20 years. Or I've been pastored for 20 years, and I was a senior pastor for about 2. I've spent 15 years in the missionary field, so I've been around the world. So at this time, 13 years old, I'm faithful going to church, things like that. And I go to this creek. The first weekend we move into this little shack. My mom, myself, my dad, my sister. My mom and my dad are working on their marriage. And I go down to this creek, and I start fishing. And this creek's probably at the widest, 25 to 30 feet at the widest. But, it narrows and widens. And I find I'm about 2 miles from my house, and I'm fishing, catching rainbow trout, German browns, having a good old time. In front of me is this huge cotton tree. I don't know if you're familiar with cotton trees, but this thing was about 40 feet tall and probably, I want to say, 20 to 25 feet wide with the foliage. And on the other side of that tree, there was something. When I was sitting there fishing, all of a sudden it got really deafening quiet. I don't know if you understand what deafening quiet is, but there's no squirrels, no birds, there's nothing. It is so quiet that there's a ringing in your ears quiet. And I feel unwelcomed, I feel uneasy, I feel panic, I fear terror. And I hear on the other side of the creek, I hear something walking. And when it gets behind this tree at the base, I think, was probably maybe 3 feet in diameter, 2 to 3 feet, about that. All of a sudden, this thing just starts rattling and shaking, like something's shaking it. And I hear, can I make a sound? I hear the sound of, and it's scary. I almost peed myself. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, I think I know what this thing is. From the Patterson-Gimlin film, from all the research of all the books that I've read, because this time there is no internet that we had access to. And I never saw anything, but I could hear this thing. And what I did was I decided, my life is in such turmoil. If something's going to take my life, let it happen. Because my family's on the verge of divorce, we're financially bankrupt, I'm overwhelmed in this new city, I don't know what to do. I'm going to stand my ground and fish. And I started singing songs from my Sunday school that I used to be a part of. And when I did that, it got real calm. And it was like I felt peace. And then whatever it was, I spoke to it, and I said, I'm not going to fear you, because I have nothing to live for. So I have nothing to lose. Because in a family, I used to be a marriage counselor. In a family, the thing that will make or break a child's life is a relationship of a mother and father. When they break, it is traumatic. It breaks you. And at that point, I didn't feel like I really had anything to live for. But I kept going back to the creek, and I kept going back to the creek to the point where I didn't feel unwelcomed. I felt like I was being watched, and whenever I'd catch fish, I'd clean them, and I'd throw the guts and the head on the other side of the creek. After a while, it's like nobody in the neighborhood would be down at the creek after dark because it was too scary. And I felt, I even camped down there. I never crossed the creek. I felt that was a no-no, but I always stood on the side of the creek. But after about 4 months, I felt welcomed, and there was areas I felt like I shouldn't go, so I didn't. You just listen to that sixth sense, that the eye of your heart. You know, I don't know how else to explain it, but it felt like I was being wanted, and it felt like it was okay. I felt like I finally found a place that I belonged, because I grew up in the backwoods. This city stuff was so strange to me, and I felt a lot more at peace in the woods there. And what's really unfortunate is I had a hound, a black and tan blue tick hound that I used to take squirrel hunting. She used to track me, and one day she got out, and one day she never came back. And that was really unusual. Either she got hit by a car, or I don't know what happened. But that was kind of traumatic for me. But after that, you know, after a year and a half there, my parents ended up working through it, and we were able to move back on the family farm, because they were able to work out some financial things. But that was my first experience of seeing some kind of a cryptid thing that I interacted with physically like that. And anyway, so
It has to be pretty traumatic at such a young age, you know, to go through such a turmoil with family, and then to have something almost like a life, like an out-of-body experience in a way, just affect you at such a young age. And often, too, people have stood ground when it comes to these cryptid encounters, despite what the situation is. And personally, it's worked. So whether it's the work of the unique of song and how it affected it, very much so could be the case. And personally, it sounds like that could have been easily the case, but even in the positive route of how it went about, following that such situation. But for even after all those years of seeing it, how has it changed you? How has your perspective been now following that?
I have learned to trust my, I want to say, inner senses. And I have learned that what we're told is not necessarily the truth. And I've learned to seek out my own truth and to seek out my own answers, and not to trust the powers that be that rule over us, if I can put it in those terms. Because the things that are out there and what is claimed to be out there, I think there's two different stories. And I've become hypersensitive, hypervigilant about things, situations, scenarios. You could say that I kind of grew up being paranoid. And I used to be on a lot of medication for that, for paranoia and things like that, mood-altering things to keep my moods because of things I've experienced. But now I take an Advil once in a while for a headache. But so that's kind of how it's changed me. And I've got an open mind. When somebody comes to me with a story, I usually have a Sasquatch sticker on my truck. I own a couple trucks. If you're a true redneck, you at least own 2 trucks. And that's how Lobo, when we met, he saw the Sasquatch sticker on my truck, and he started telling me about Sasquatch. And I went, oh, we're kindred spirits here. And so I've been able, as a counselor, and I've been a grief and PTSD traumatic counselor, and I've been a counselor for a hospice program for death and dying and things like that. So I've been able to listen to people's experiences and say, you know what? You're not crazy. You know what? You experienced something. And if it's truth for you, truth is truth. Even if it doesn't fit in the box of what we call reality, the reality of what's really real is bigger than what we've been fed in our public school systems.
I have to agree with that. I mean, personally, going to school now, even just seeing how the books are played, it is very controversial and on top of the things that we know or don't know. But that is a pretty good way of putting it, and I do have to agree with what you said. But I want to talk to you guys now, both, of what you guys have seen together. Now, you guys get together and share the similar experiences. Where did it all start from there? How did it begin?
So, just so you guys know, Tiberius and I, we got an awesome, unique relationship. We're really good friends. Him, being a federal investigator and me being full-time ministry for a church, it's a pretty interesting mix because, the whole the church and state thing, right? Like it's a good combination, and he's really with facts, investigating, and numbers and all that, and then he has the faith background. It's like, okay, well, the numbers don't add up, but this is what I saw. So how does that come into the mix? So when we, for just to let you guys know about our area again, we live in the desert area of Idaho, which is the valley, and it's interesting because it's called the Magic Valley, and just that in itself, it just shows you how it is. But we live in a valley, to the north of us we have the Rocky Mountains, we got the Sawtooth Mountains, the Smoky Mountains. To the south of our town we have more of the Sawtooth Mountains, the Magic Mountains, that's another awesome name, the South Hills, and then we have the canyon right here in the city of Twin Falls, which is the deepest gorge in America. It's actually deeper than the Grand Canyon, and so it's huge. It's just a vast canyon with cave systems. We have a cave system north of us. There's hundreds of miles. I mean, people come from all over the world. They do tours there. Just the mammoth caves and the ice caves, and there's a lot of undocumented ones that the high school kids go to. They party and they have, there's a lot of darkness goes on. Yeah, and a lot of the government doesn't want you to know about. We know those. We can go to those places that are not on a map, and we could show you, no, they're here, but nobody wants you to know about them. So anyways, that's where we live. And if you go into the canyon here, there's the big canyon, and then on the south side of town which is where I live, there's the Rock Creek Canyon, and this canyon is smaller than the main one on the other side of town, but it's still, you go down there and it's like a jungle. There's swamps, it's just lush wetlands. It's amazing. You go down there and it feels like you're in the Amazon or something. It's crazy. So that's where we had, Tiberius and I, our first experience, us being dummies, okay? And I'm saying this because we go down, we get together and we say, hey, we should go look down there. There's, we know there's.
This is Tiberius. Sorry to interrupt. What we do is, before this COVID-19 thing, we would go every Friday and meet in this canyon for lunch and spend an hour just talking about our day, talking about spiritual things, cryptid things, whatever. And so that's where it all started.
That's true. That's exactly where it started. So one day we got this crazy idea for us to go to the canyon and just to walk around and just to see what's down there, And so we weren't planning on being there after dark, so we didn't take our flashlights. And those of you who don't know, like, the canyon life, above the canyon, it could be daylight, and inside the canyon, it gets dark really fast. It's a lot faster, and when it gets dark, it's like pitch black. So we go down there and we start walking around, and we go onto this route that's you're not allowed to go on, right? So we start walking around there, and then
that's why we walked it, because you're not allowed
yeah,
to.
we walked it because we weren't allowed to. That's just who we are. We like to push boundaries and look. We want to find truth for ourselves. So we start walking down there, and then we pluck this piece of grass out, and if you some of you guys may know, you put it between your thumbs, and you could do like wounded rabbit screams, and to draw on predators or whatnot. So we did that just to mess around, and all of a sudden, these magpies just surrounded us, screaming, and then they took off, and then a fox jumped out. Tiberius saw a fox, and then what really threw us off, we heard a mountain lion, which was close by us. And just so you know, the Rock Creek Canyon goes through the middle of the south side of Twin Falls. So it's in the middle of the city.
All the way to the Snake River.
All the way to the Snake River. So we're walking around down there, and we hear this mountain lion, and we're like, oh snap. We're like, we know stuff's getting real when you have a cougar that's screaming at you. So we back up, and we start going the other way of the canyon. We start walking.
Now understand this. I don't mean to interrupt. I'm always armed. I'm paranoid. I'm always armed. This time I've got a Black Hawk Ruger 41 Magnum on me.
Yeah, so he's packing heat, and I feel comfortable. I'm like, okay, he's packing some heat. I don't have anything on me. I have a pocket knife, which is, I don't know what that's going to do, but we're walking, and we don't have any flashlights. And in this canyon, there's something about it where, and we can get into this more on the paranormal side, but when you go down there, people have a tendency of getting lost, a tendency of staying down there longer than they should be, running out of supplies, different odd things like that. So we're walking.
There's no logical reason.
Yeah, there's no logical reason why.
It's like getting lost in your front yard.
It's really strange. So we're walking, and all of a sudden, we realize that it's dark. It's dark.
15 minutes darkness falls.
15 minutes, it's pitch black, and we're like, oh man, we messed up, bro. Like we're like at least 30 minutes away from an hour from the car, and it's pitch black. We don't have flashlights, so we just go. We start walking, and that's when we start hearing the twigs snapping, the brush rustling. We start hearing stuff around us, and I love it that Tiberius, he grew up paranoid. He's always on the lookout, right? So when you get somebody that confirms your fear or confirms what you think you just witnessed, you're like, no, I didn't see that. You don't say anything, and somebody confirms it. Well, that's what happened that night. We're walking, and this large black figure on two legs. I mean, we're hearing all these noises, right? So we know something's out there. We know it's either following us, something like it's paralleling us, and all of a sudden this figure off on the trail runs across the trail, and it's pitch black, and whatever it was blacker than black.
It was darker than the darkness.
It was darker than the darkness, and I didn't say anything because I thought my eyes were playing tricks. I'm like, I hope my eyes are playing tricks, and I didn't say anything. And about a 2-second pass, he says something. He goes, a figure just crossed the path in front of us, and I freaked out.
It was about 150 yards in front of us. We went back and measured.
Yeah, I freaked out because I was so scared. Like my fear, the pucker factor, my heart was going, and I didn't have I had a knife. He had the gun, but still we're walking. And I saw it, and my worst fear, I was like, man, I think something's following me. I didn't want to tell him because we're fairly new and hanging out. I was like, I think something's following me, something's paralleling us. I'm like, I don't know what to do. We don't have flashlights. I'm like, I don't even know if I'm gonna make it home tonight. And I'm freaking out. And all of a sudden, the creature crosses in front of us, and my heart dropped, and I didn't say anything. And he said it. He said it just passed in front of us, and I lost it. I grabbed him by the arm. I'm like, we gotta go, bro. We gotta go. And I start freaking out, and he's got his gun pointed already, and we're backing up, and we're trying to figure out a way out of there, and we feel trapped. And we walk, and I'm sure I was praying in my mind. He's praying. We're watching our back. We could hear it following us the whole time.
There was at least two.
There was at least two. And so we finally make it back to the car. And just so you guys know, my house, literally right now where I'm doing this recording, is down the street from this canyon. It's like literally
300 yards.
It's yeah, you can walk down there. Me, my wife, and my kids, we go all the time to the canyon, right? So we make it back to the car and we drive to my house, which is down the street. And we come back here to my house and we're like, dude, what just happened? And we started drinking right away. We opened up the bottle, we started drinking, we started talking because we're like, what just happened, right? And that's not just the scariest part. This is what changed my life forever. About a week after that, and this is November. This is about when we went and looked. It was November 2018. And this is December now, and this is what has rattled my dreams. This is what has haunted my wife. And this has terrorized my kids. Something followed me home. It had to have, and this really bothers me. And we've since bought. I got some high-powered rifles. I got weapons everywhere because it just freaks me out when I go out to go throw the garbage at night. When I go to get something in the car at freaking night, I'm freaked out because I'm down the street from this canyon, and what I'm about to tell you is not a lie. It's 100% real. And so in December, which is weeks after our little investigation down there, my wife tells me, my wife tells me in the morning, she says, something jumped on our roof last night. I'm like, what? She goes, something big right above our bedroom jumped on our roof, and it was like 2, 3, or 4, somewhere around there in the morning, and it was big and loud. And I'm like, are you serious? She goes, I was frozen in fear. She couldn't move. She said she woke up and she could hear her walking on top of our roof, moving around right where our bed was at. She said it sounded massive. And she said she couldn't move. She couldn't wake me up, and I was sleeping. And she stayed awake as long as she could. And she couldn't move. And then finally she was able to move, and she couldn't hear anything. And she was thinking maybe it was a dream or something. And so she told me, so I go outside, and it's snow already, right? So I go outside and I look on my roof, and it's snowing all night, and there's tracks on my roof, but the snow has covered them so you can see them a little bit. And I'm like, no freaking way. Something was on my roof. And I look on my neighbor's house, and on their roof there's tracks also. And on the neighbor on the other side, there's tracks also. And then the canyon's like right down the street. So I'm like, what the heck? Something was on my roof, and it traveled on our roofs to the canyon. So I'm like blown away. And I'm like, man, this is not real. Like, what's going on here? 1 or 2 nights pass by. And by the way, every night I'm paranoid. We're not going outside. And if you guys don't know what a blizzard is in Idaho, the snow is so heavy, it's so cold, it comes everywhere. If you wear a jacket, it's like blowing, it's like a blizzard, a whirlwind of snow, and it's so loud you can't hear somebody honking outside your house. If somebody's at your house and they're honking, you can't hear them. That's what a blizzard is in Idaho. And so every night is like that. It's just a freezing blizzard. Travel advisory. Nobody's supposed to drive because the roads are so full of snow and icy and all that. So we're just at home, and I'm paranoid, and I'm just like thinking about all this stuff, right? And then a couple nights after that, I'm sleeping, and something wakes me up. I don't know what it was, but something woke me up. I think it was a thump. It woke me up, and because I don't wake up, when those of you are listening, please follow this. If you wake up at night and you don't know why, something woke your senses up and you don't understand why. So you get up and you check on your family, check the doors, check the windows, all that stuff. So I did that. I woke up. I'm like, something woke me up. I was already on edge, and so I go and I check on all of our doors. They're all locked. The windows are locked. I go and look at the baby's rooms. My children are sleeping, wife is sleeping. So I look out the blinds. The blizzard's going. I'm like, something woke me up, and then the blizzard stops. It like stops. The wind stops, and then it starts turning to a calm night. So I go back to bed, and I wake up, a few hours later, and I think, you know what? I'm gonna go look on my roof. I'm like, what if, just by some crazy thought, what if something woke me? What if I heard the thump or something? And so I go out there, and sure enough, there's more tracks, but this time there was no fresh snow. And those are the pictures. I've sent those to Chris. I've put them on there, the ones before that are covered in snow, but you could see them. And then I put the ones that are not covered, and you could see it right above the tracks, right above my window or above my bedroom on my roof, where something is walking, and it looks like there's two legs. I mean, it was there, bipedal, and that's what woke me up. And so and I couldn't believe it. And that, that's when I went and bought my firearms. I invested in a lot of money in an alarm system. All of our windows, all of our doors have alarm system. So if anything happens, it's really loud and it wakes us all up, just in case my kids try to go out at night or something tries to draw one of them out, or who knows what, just to give me a heads up that something's going down. I have every entrance in my home that is alarmed and ready. and just thinking about that, there's no way somebody should live, right? And I think about it, and I'm like, and I look down the street and I see the canyon, and I'm like, there's something sketchy about this place. And so that's my experience. That's where we went, and that's where we first encountered this. And that's when I was talking to Tiberius, and I told him, and he's on roll. He's always like, I'll be at your house. I'll come with firearms. I'm bringing my sons. And him, he's no joke, because he's got the advantage of being the federal agent. He's got resources. He's got the whole show, right? So he tells me, he goes, I don't think it was a Sasquatch. He tells me, because I thought it was a Bigfoot. I'm like, maybe that was a Bigfoot we saw across our path that night. And he's like, I don't know if that was a Bigfoot. And he goes, maybe it was a juvenile. He goes, but maybe I think it was a Dogman. He tells me, and that's where Dogman. That's when I really first heard the Dogman. I'm like, what the heck? I'm like, I was trying to process it, and then he sent me a video of these different types, and I think it was Kumba and Bear who talked about it. Another one, I just started researching, and then I started researching how a lot of reports of them on roofs and canyons and cave systems and all this stuff. And so that was our first experience, which I believe was a Dogman here in our canyon. Whether if it was migrating, traveling, or if it lives down there or what, I have no idea. But I do know it's just down the street, and it was on my roof, and my life hasn't been the same. I've had dreams about this. My wife has had dreams. My kids have had dreams, and they didn't even know about it, but they were telling me about I got little ones, about these creatures trying to come in the home, just weird stuff. And so me being a pastor, it's, I don't want to give too much information, but it's the biggest church here in the Magic Valley, right? There's a lot of people. We know a lot of people. There's
3,000 members.
There's 3,000 members, anyways. So me being a man of faith, I know a lot of people, and I have to be careful with what I say, just to protect my identity and my wife, to protect our testimony and whatnot. But that's what happened, and that's the life I live every day. And here later on, we're going to talk about more encounters, and what just happened recently, something I told Chris about, where I actually had to call Tiberius and the Fish and Game.
And let me give you some facts. After this happened, I began to reach out to sister agencies here in Idaho, and there have been reports of large black dogs, and they thought first they were a pack of coyotes, and I got one report from one eyewitnesses said that they thought there was a wolf. And since then, Lobo and I have been down there this last year. I don't remember the month. I think it was February of this year, where we found prints of a wolf. I mean, let me retract that. Canine prints. They're almost the size of Lobo's hand, chasing a very mature buck. Because if you look at the tracks, I grew up tracking, hunting, and fishing. You can tell the difference between a buck and a doe, and we got pictures of that. I don't know if he sent them to you.
I sent them to Chris.
But so I went and I looked at the facts and I looked at the other people's testimonies. People's dogs have been going missing, going in the brush. They're hearing something and the dog doesn't come out and they can't find it. So I can testify to that as far as proof on record. I've seen the reports and I've talked to animal control here in the city, and so anyway.
Yeah, and if you have any questions, Chris, because we have another time that we went on Halloween night of 2019, which was so stupid, but it was a lot of fun. And I don't recommend this to anybody who knows our area, because we're giving up the location. Don't do it anywhere. Don't go on Halloween at midnight to a place where you've had these encounters where things are happening. But yeah, so that was our first encounter together.
Yeah, and when we went down on Halloween, we took an individual from Fish and Game.
Yeah,
Idaho Department of Fish and Game.
We took him with us.
We're going to call him Young Atlas. And he had a face-to-face encounter about 40 feet with something about 800 pounds, he said. And the eye shine was so, he was scared. He pissed himself. He changed his life.
Before we do leave, it wouldn't be safe to say that since what we've been doing lately is we've been creating a shout-out page, or at least, for me, a plug-in page that is always beneficial to other content creators out there. A lot of people that I follow on Twitter have a lot of interesting things, and I think it's important that as other content creators that have kind of grown, it's important that we engage and discuss with others as well, and you guys take a look at their content. First and foremost, if you guys like paranormal activity, I want you guys to check out Clown's Paranormal Adventures. Clown goes out to some pretty abandoned areas, some graveyards, and even during this COVID outbreak has pretty seen some interesting things. Ghost Strikers UK, Scott Bauer, who I had on my show 2 weeks ago, that's his channel. Feel free to check it out, folks. It's pretty interesting content, much like Clown investigating abandoned areas, and he pretty much checks out some pretty crazy places in the UK. So if you guys are looking for some crazy paranormal adventures, I want you guys to check out those two channels respectively. On top of that, another paranormal investigative channel, Beyond the Veil Investigations. A duo couple that investigates and checks out some pretty crazy content. I think you guys would like that, especially if it's a duo. I think duos are always beneficial and makes a good channel creation because of the personalities and the mix they can deliver between both. So please check out Beyond the Veil Investigations as well. Now, folks, if you guys are a content creator and you yourself would like to have your show plugged in and a shout out, feel free to let me know down below. Or if you'd like to send me an email in reference to it, whatever works both ways, feel free to. But hear what these two gentlemen had to say in reference to their encounters and what they had came across when they were doing their duo investigation together. I think it's pretty crazy to think that Idaho has a series of array of Dogman and Bigfoot encounters. I've looked at the Dogman map, the Bigfoot maps of reports in Idaho, and I have to say that a lot of the reports is a lot of green and a lot of red. So I think that it's safe to say that there are Bigfoot and Dogmen in the state of Idaho. More importantly, I believe that these men have seen something that they cannot explain. And I think, too, at the same time, like many others out there who have encounters, it's something that you can't really explain, especially because of the content matter. But folks, before we do conclude tonight's show, this is again part 1 of a series of 2 parts that we're doing with these 2 guests. And as you know, Ryan was not there to this past interview because of some audio constraints. But overall, folks, we'll see Ryan again for the next interview Guys, if you guys enjoyed this show, feel free to always like and feel free to share and subscribe. YouTube's algorithm has kind of compromised younger content creator shows. In this case, content shows that do not exceed over 50K subscribers. So it'd be very beneficial if you guys like, subscribe, and share this content out there. If you are new to my channel and like what you're seeing, of course, after all, please feel free. Now, if you would like to, we have a Venomous Fringe Facebook page you guys can go and take a look at and give a like. Also a Facebook group if you guys would like to join. Engage with me and Ryan in social media. We have a bunch of social media links down below, from Twitters to Instagrams to also, if you guys would like to get in contact with me, you can leave me an email at thevenomousfringe@gmail.com. We'll see you guys over the weekend with another episode. You guys have a good evening. Bye.